Emily was on her way to the notary's office, suspicious of her husband and his mistress. But what puzzled her most was why her mother-in-law had included her in the will, when in life she had despised her. And the moment the notary pulled out the will and began to read it, laughter suddenly stopped. Hello, my dear friends. Take a break for just a minute. I want to share a story that might make you see your loved ones in a different light. Write in the comments where you're watching us from. We wish you a pleasant listen. The notary's waiting area was cool despite the stifling July day. The air conditioner hummed quietly, pushing out the stale air. Emily Carter adjusted the collar of her only decent dress for the third time. Dark blue, with a thin silver trim, it had been bought 5 years ago for Alan's graduation. For what felt like the 100th time in the past half hour, she glanced at her wristwatch. An old Seiko with a worn strap, her mother's gift when she graduated from Teachers College. The little hand was creeping closer to noon. The other heirs were due to arrive any minute now, and the thought made her stomach clench. The waiting room was empty except for the secretary behind the glass partition, typing intently, occasionally sneaking curious looks at Emily. Somewhere down the hall came muffled voices, the rustle of papers, a ringing phone. Just the ordinary life of a notary's office, a world Emily didn't belong to at all. Why am I even here? She thought for the 100th time, nervously tugging at the worn strap of her brown purse, a clearance find 3 years ago. She remembered the moment she got the official letter inviting her to the reading of the will. The thick paper envelope with the law office logo had looked so out of place among utility bills and school notices that Emily first thought it was a mistake. But no, it was clearly addressed, Emily Carter, personal delivery. At home, when she showed the letter to Victor, he just laughed. Mother probably decided to leave you her old china cabinet as punishment, he sneered, sipping brandy from the crystal glass Margaret had given him for his last birthday. Or maybe that turquoise ring she never wore. What do you think, sweetheart? $100? Maybe 2? He laughed again as he dialed someone's number. Emily overheard him telling Alice about it, chuckling. Can you believe it? Mother even included her. Guess she wanted one last joke. In life, Margaret never missed a chance to remind her that a daughter-in-law like Emily wasn't worthy of her precious son. Just a history teacher, no connections, no status, from an ordinary family, a nurse and an engineer's daughter. A burden on our family. She'd said it with such disdain, as if Emily weren't an award-winning teacher with 20 years' experience, but some street beggar. What hurt most was hearing it in front of her husband, who would only nod silently, agreeing with his mother. Emily sighed, smoothed imaginary creases from her dress, and pulled a small pocket mirror from her bag, its frame worn with age. Another inheritance, this one from her grandmother. Staring back at her was a tired 45-year-old woman with neatly styled chestnut hair already streaked with gray, fine lines around her gray eyes, and lips pressed tight with resolve. When did I get this old? The thought flashed through her mind, but Emily pushed it away. Not the time for soul-searching. Behind her, a door opened and the click of heels echoed across the marble floor. Emily instinctively straightened, recognizing the stride instantly. Only one woman in Victor's circle walked like that. You're here too? Hoping you'll get something? Came the mocking voice. Emily turned slowly. Victor stood in the doorway, dressed impeccably in a charcoal 3-piece suit, with a perfectly knotted tie and the cufflinks his mother had given him for his 40th. Time had been kind to him. At 47, he was still attractive, if you ignored the softening belly and the receding hairline he tried to hide with a special haircut. Next to him, clinging as always, was Alice. 35, polished, blonde, once Margaret's personal assistant and now openly Victor's mistress. She wore an ivory-sheathed dress, high heels from some Italian designer, and gold pearl earrings, an expensive gift from Margaret the previous Women's Day. Emily remembered that day vividly, the family dinner at Margaret's country house, the way her mother-in-law had ostentatiously handed those earrings to her indispensable assistant, while Emily herself had received the obligatory box of chocolates. I remember you always loved these, Margaret had said with a smirk. The irony being, of course, Emily had been allergic to soufflé sweets since childhood, and Margaret knew it perfectly well. I was invited, Emily answered simply, trying to keep her voice steady. She refused to show how much the pair's arrogance cut her. After 15 years of marriage, she'd grown used to humiliation. Oh, come on, Victor stepped closer. He smelled of Dior Sauvage and something else, power, the smugness of a man who always got what he wanted. 15 years, and she had never grown used to that smell. Mother probably included you out of pity. Maybe left you her old tea set or that crystal vase. He chuckled, and Alice echoed him instantly, her laugh like clinking crystal glasses, bright, brittle, and empty. Emily remembered when she had first fallen for Victor, a young, ambitious economics graduate, the son of a prominent businesswoman. He had seemed like everything a girl could dream of, handsome, smart, with a shining future. Back then, his arrogance had seemed like strength. Now she saw only emptiness and cruelty behind it. "Victor," Emily said quietly, meeting her husband's eyes, "I'm not after anything. I'm here because I respect your mother's final wishes." Her voice wavered, but she fought to keep it firm. "Oh, stop it," Alice cut in, adjusting her flawless hairdo where not a single strand was out of place. "We all know Margaret never really cared for." The sound of another door opening interrupted her. Standing in the doorway was Gerald Peterson, a tall man of about 60, with a neatly trimmed gray beard, wearing a dark gray suit and thin-rimmed glasses. The notary, an old family friend of Victor's, he was one of the few who had known Margaret back when she was a young woman starting her business during the tough financial crisis of the early 90s. "Please, everyone, come in," he said formally, his gaze sweeping the room. When his eyes landed on Emily, she thought she saw a flicker of sympathy, or maybe she only imagined it. Emily instinctively adjusted her hair and tugged at her dress. Surrounded by people accustomed to wealth and luxury, she felt small. Her modest teacher's outfit clashed sharply with Alice's designer wardrobe and the polished style of the others. She entered last, her knees trembling. The room was spacious, with high ceilings and heavy curtains. A massive mahogany desk, leather chairs, gilded framed paintings. Everything spoke of money and stability. Emily couldn't help but think of her cramped teacher's lounge at school, with its peeling paint and wobbly chairs. Inside were already seated other members of the Carter family. Sandra Thompson, Victor's older sister, a well-groomed 50-year-old with the same commanding posture and piercing eyes as their mother, alongside her husband, a balding, heavy-set man who owned a chain of pharmacies. Next to them was the younger brother, Paul, an art restorer, the only one in the family who had chosen a creative path against his mother's will. Paul gave Emily a small nod and a faint smile. In all her 15 years in this family, he was the only one who had ever treated her with kindness, maybe because he, too, felt like the odd one out in a family obsessed with money and status. Emily took a seat in the far corner, trying to make herself as invisible as possible. She remembered the first time she had come to this house, a young bride, full of hope for a happy future. How Margaret had given her a quick, appraising glance and immediately turned away, as if seeing nothing worth her attention. From that moment on, their relationship had been predetermined. "Since everyone is here," the notary began, spreading the papers on the desk, "let's proceed with the reading of Margaret Carter's will." Victor lounged in his chair, resting an arm on the back of Alice's seat. He looked smug, as though he already considered his mother's fortune his own. In recent years he had effectively been running her business while she spent more and more time traveling or undergoing treatments in Europe. To everyone, it seemed obvious that the eldest son was the heir to Margaret's empire. "I, Margaret Carter, being of sound mind and memory," the notary began the standard formula, and suddenly Emily clearly remembered her last conversation with her mother-in-law, a month before her death. That day Margaret had unexpectedly found her in the small workshop in the basement of the family's country house. Emily had been trying to restore an old jewelry box that had belonged to her grandmother. Wooden, inlaid with mother-of-pearl, darkened with age, its lock sticking. Emily was bent over it, carefully cleaning the pattern with a fine brush, and hadn't heard the door open. "So this is what you do when everyone thinks you're cooking or grading papers," Margaret had said, startling her so badly she nearly ruined her work. Emily braced herself for the usual criticism, but in Margaret's voice there was, for the first time, not disdain, but something like curiosity. Her mother-in-law came closer, leaning over the box, examining the delicate work. "Where did you learn this?" she asked, and Emily, surprised by her sudden interest, told her about her grandfather, a cabinetmaker who had taught her to work with wood since childhood. About the restoration classes she had secretly attended in the evenings years ago. About her dream to one day open a small workshop. Margaret had listened in silence, studying the pieces Emily had already restored, the old cabinet in the corner, the picture frame, the sewing box. Then she asked suddenly, "And why have you never spoken of this?" "You wouldn't have approved anyway," Emily answered honestly, and for a fleeting moment, something strange crossed her mother-in-law's face. Surprise, maybe, or regret. That day Margaret looked at her differently for the first time, and a week later, she was hospitalized with a massive stroke, from which she never recovered. Emily visited her several times, but her mother-in-law never regained consciousness. Now, listening to the notary's monotone voice listing apartments, accounts, and shares left to Margaret's children, grandchildren, and distant relatives, Emily thought only of one thing. Why had Margaret included her in the will? Was it really just to humiliate her one last time in front of the family by leaving her some trinket out of pity, just as Victor had said? She stole a glance around the room. Sandra whispered into her husband's ear, throwing Emily annoyed looks now and then. Paul stared out the window, as if none of this concerned him. Victor stroked Alice's wrist, not bothering to hide their relationship even in such a formal setting. Alice smiled smugly, as if she already saw herself mistress of the Carter estate. And now, the notary's voice suddenly grew louder, pulling Emily back to reality. We come to the main part of the estate, the controlling stake in the Carter heritage chain of antique shops. Victor leaned forward, a predatory grin spreading across his face. Alice placed her hand on his knee, squeezing his leg in anticipation. Sandra stopped whispering and tensed. Even Paul turned from the window and looked at the notary. Gerald Peterson cleared his throat, put on his glasses, and continued, 30% of the shares of Carter Heritage are bequeathed in full ownership to. He paused, looking over his glasses at those seated before him. Emily Carter. The silence in the room was so deep that Emily could hear her own heartbeat. Seconds stretched into eternity. She stopped breathing, unable to believe her ears. It had to be a mistake, some misunderstanding, or perhaps one of Margaret's cruel jokes. Victor froze, his mouth open. Alice turned pale, nearly matching the ivory shade of her dress. Sandra let out a strangled sound, almost a squeak, while her husband tugged nervously at his tie. Only Paul looked at Emily with a faint half-smile, as though nothing about this surprised him. This is some kind of mistake. Victor broke the silence first. His voice was hoarse, as if he couldn't catch his breath. Mother couldn't have, that's impossible. Gerald Peterson calmly adjusted his glasses. No mistake, Victor. I personally drafted this document under your mother's instructions. She was of sound mind and full awareness. This is absurd. Victor shot to his feet, his face turning crimson. 30%? A third of the business? To her? He pointed at Emily as if she were an object. A woman who knows nothing about antiques or business. A schoolteacher who can't even buy herself a decent dress. Emily sat clutching the armrests of her chair, the ground slipping away beneath her. She was sure she had misheard. 30% of the shares? Margaret, who had barely acknowledged her existence in life, had left her a third of her business, the business that was her pride, her life's work, built from scratch in the toughest of times. Let's all calm down, the notary said. I haven't finished yet. Victor dropped back into his chair, fists clenching and unclenching. His expensive cufflinks glittered under the lamp. Alice whispered frantically into his ear, but he seemed not to hear. Sandra and her husband exchanged bewildered looks. Paul kept his eyes on Emily, the faint smile never leaving his face, as if he knew something the rest didn't. 19% of the shares, the notary continued, go to Victor Carter on the condition. He paused, and Emily noticed his fingers trembling slightly. Whatever was in this will, it was unsettling even to a seasoned lawyer. On the condition that he remain in lawful marriage with Emily for at least 5 years from the reading of the will. In case of divorce or separation during that time, the shares will pass to a specially created Margaret Carter Foundation for the support of young restorers. This time, the silence was deafening. Emily watched Victor's face turn white, then blotchy red. Alice looked like someone had punched the air out of her lungs. This is illegal, Victor shouted, leaping up again. She can't control my private life from the grave. I'll contest this will. You have to allow it, Gerald. You can, Victor, Peterson answered evenly. But I must warn you, your mother anticipated this possibility. If any heir contests the will, all assets due to that person are automatically transferred to the foundation. But why? Emily asked suddenly, surprised she had found the strength to speak. Why would she do this? The notary looked at her with unexpected warmth. Margaret left a video message. She asked that it be shown after the main points of the will were read. Gerald Peterson rose from the desk, walked over to the wall where a large television hung, and turned it on with the remote. For a few seconds the screen remained black, and then Margaret's face appeared. Emily flinched without meaning to. Her mother-in-law looked ill already, but she still held herself like a queen. She sat in her favorite armchair in the country house library, surrounded by books and antique knickknacks she'd collected her whole life. She wore a dark blue dress and a string of pearls. Emily remembered that outfit. Her mother-in-law wore it to every important family event. If you're watching this video, it means I'm already gone. Margaret's voice sounded a little muffled compared to life, but just as commanding. and I assume you're all in shock over my will." She smiled faintly, and in that smile Emily sensed something new, unfamiliar. Maybe sadness. Maybe regret. Victor and Emily are probably the most surprised. Margaret leaned forward slightly, looking straight into the camera. "Victor, I know you're sure you deserve the controlling stake. You always considered yourself the only worthy heir to the business. But, my son, you never understood the true value of what I built." She paused, adjusted the pearls at her neck, a gesture Emily had seen hundreds of times over her years of marriage. A habit that gave away the nerves of the usually unflappable Margaret. Carter Heritage isn't just a chain of shops. It's history, it's art, it's preserving beauty for future generations. And all you ever saw in it was money and status. Emily shot Victor a sidelong glance. He sat gripping the chair arms so hard his knuckles turned white, watching the screen with anger, confusion, and something else. Fear? "And now to you, Emily." On the screen, Margaret tilted her head slightly, and Emily jumped at the sound of her own name. "For 15 years I watched you endure my son's neglect, his infidelity, his selfishness. For 15 years you carried the Carter name with dignity, even though we weren't always kind to you." A lump rose in Emily's throat. Those words, the first acknowledgement of her worth from her mother-in-law in all these years, rang especially bitter now that Margaret was gone. "But it's not just about that," Margaret went on. "A month ago, I happened to see your work. Your hands, Emily, are the hands of a true restorer. You have what money can't buy and bloodlines can't guarantee, talent and a love for old things." The room grew so quiet Emily could hear the wall clock ticking. Everyone was looking from the screen to her, as if seeing her for the first time. "You know," Margaret suddenly smiled on the screen, and the smile transformed her usually stern face, "I once dreamed of becoming a restorer too. As a young woman I studied at an art school and restored antique furniture. Then I married Andrew, had children, and my husband convinced me it was frivolous. That status and social standing mattered more than some little woodworking shop." She took a deep breath, and Emily saw a shadow of old pain cross her face. "I listened. I opened my first antique store, then a second, then a third. I built a business empire. But do you know what I realized at the end of my life? I betrayed my dream, and that is my greatest regret." A tear slid down Emily's cheek. She had never imagined that the commanding, always self-assured Margaret had the same dreams and doubts she herself carried. "When I watched you working on that jewelry box," Margaret shook her head, "I saw myself in you, young me. And I decided that you, at least, should not betray your gift. That's why 30% of the shares are yours, outright. It will give you financial independence and the freedom to do what you love." She adjusted her pearls again, that nervous tick Emily knew so well. "As for the 19% for Victor, yes, the condition may seem strange or even cruel, but it's my way of giving you both a chance. For you, Emily, to find yourself, your strength, to stop fearing change. And for you, Victor, to finally become a real man and learn to value what you have." On the screen, Margaret straightened, looking once more like the commanding businesswoman everyone knew. "The remaining shares are divided among Sandra, Paul, and their children as specified in the will. But remember, only together can you make the key decisions about the company's future. I hope this forces you to listen to one another and find compromises." She paused, as if gathering her thoughts. "And one last thing. Emily, there's an envelope for you in Gerald's safe. Read it when you're alone." The video ended, and the screen went dark. A heavy silence settled over the room. Emily sat stunned. All of it felt like a strange dream. 30% of the company. Financial independence. A mother-in-law who had actually seen her not as the wrong kind of daughter-in-law, but as a kindred spirit. It was too much to take in. "I don't believe a word of it," Victor finally grated out, breaking the silence. His voice trembled with barely contained fury. "Mother wasn't in her right mind. Someone took advantage. They misled her. She couldn't do this to me." The last words he almost shouted. "Victor," the notary replied calmly, "your mother underwent a full medical evaluation before drafting the will. 2 independent physicians confirmed her capacity. The will is legally airtight and all formalities were observed. You do, of course, have the right to contest it in court, but as I've already stated." Yes, I remember," Victor snapped. "If I contest, I get nothing at all. Wonderful blackmail." He turned on Emily, his eyes blazing. You turned her against me. You manipulated a sick old woman." "Victor," Emily said quietly, meeting his stare. "You know that isn't true. Don't you dare tell me what's true and what isn't," he shouted, springing to his feet. "For 15 years I put up with you in my house. I fed you, clothed you, let you live like a human being. And you just waited for your chance to stab me in the back. Victor, the notary interjected, please, control your temper. We're all civilized people here. Civilized? Victor laughed bitterly. My wife and my mother conspired behind my back to cut me out of my inheritance, and you expect me to stay calm? No one cut you out, Paul said, speaking for the first time. You're getting your 19%, just with a condition. A condition? Victor snapped toward his brother. To live with her for 5 more years? He jabbed a finger toward Emily. You have to be joking. Or divorce and forfeit the shares, Paul shrugged. Your call. My call? Victor let out a jagged laugh. What a choice. Either pretend to be a happy husband to this, he stopped under the notary's warning look, or lose the portion of the business that's rightfully mine. And you, his eyes swept the room, you're all in on it. Even you, Sandra. Sandra flinched at her name. I didn't know anything, Victor, she said, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. I swear, Mother said nothing about her plans. I'm the only one who knew, Paul said evenly. Mother consulted me before she changed the will. And you know what? I fully supported her. You. Victor took a step toward his brother, but Gerald Peterson stepped between them. Gentlemen, please, he said firmly. Let's finish the official part. All necessary documents are ready to sign. After that, you can discuss the situation somewhere more comfortable. Victor silently returned to his seat. His face had turned into a stone mask. Alice placed a hand on his shoulder, but he brushed it off with a gesture full of irritation. The next hour passed in formalities, signing documents, clarifying legal details, questions about taxes, and transferring rights. Emily signed the papers mechanically, not fully aware of what was happening. It felt as if she were watching from outside herself, as if all of this weren't really happening to her. Finally, when everything was settled, the notary handed her a sealed envelope. For you personally, from Margaret, he said quietly. Exactly as she requested. Emily accepted the envelope with trembling hands. On it, in her mother-in-law's neat handwriting, were the words, Emily, open when you're alone. What other secrets? Victor muttered through clenched teeth, noticing the envelope. What is it this time? Another surprise? Victor, the notary said wearily, it's a personal letter from your mother to your wife. Show some respect for Margaret's final wishes. Victor opened his mouth to retort, then suddenly deflated, as if all the air had gone out of him. He no longer looked like the intimidating businessman, but rather a lost, aging man whose world had slipped from under his feet. Sandra and her husband said a quiet goodbye and left, avoiding Emily's gaze. Paul, passing by, gently squeezed her shoulder and whispered, call me later. Alice stood off to the side, her expression unreadable, as though she were analyzing the situation, calculating her next move. When everyone else had gone, only Emily, Victor, and the notary remained. Emily, said Gerald Peterson, allow me once again to express my condolences on Margaret's passing. If you have any questions about managing the assets or any legal concerns, I'm always at your service. Thank you, Emily answered softly, still clutching the envelope in her hands. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like a word with Victor in private. There are a few technical matters to address. Emily nodded and headed for the door. As she passed Victor, he suddenly grabbed her hand. This isn't over, he hissed. I'll find a way to fix this. Don't think you've won. Emily freed her hand and looked him straight in the eye. I never thought of our life as a competition, Victor. I just wanted to be happy. It's a shame you never understood that. She walked out, feeling the heavy weight of her husband's glare on her back. In the hallway, Alice called after her. Emily, wait. Emily stopped, surprised. In all these years, Alice had hardly spoken to her directly, only snide remarks and mockery in front of Victor or Margaret. I want you to know, Alice came closer, lowering her voice, it's serious between me and Victor. We love each other. Emily raised an eyebrow slightly. Could Alice really be so naive as to believe in Victor's love? I'm happy for you, she said evenly. He was going to file for divorce, Alice went on, nervously tugging at her purse strap. We were planning to marry, but now this has ruined everything. I'm sorry, Emily said sincerely. She truly wished harm to neither Victor nor even Alice. But the choice is Victor's. If he really loves you more than those 19% of shares, he'll choose you. Alice flinched, as if Emily had slapped her. Doubt flickered in her eyes. Apparently, even she wasn't sure Victor would choose her over the money. It's not fair, Alice finally said. It's blackmail. Maybe, Emily agreed. But at least now you'll find out what matters more to him. You, or the money. She turned and walked away, leaving Alice standing in confusion. Outside, Emily drew a deep breath of warm summer air. For the first time in 15 years, she felt truly free. Whatever was in that envelope, whatever happened next, her life would never be the same again. Emily walked along familiar streets, turning instinctively at the right corners but noticing neither the people around her, nor the store windows, nor even the weather. Her mind was chaos. The events of the last few hours didn't fit into her usual picture of reality. The envelope in her hand felt both weightless and as heavy as stone. She stopped only when she reached the doors of the small cafe Nostalgia, the place she loved to visit after work to sip tea and grade papers in peace. The retro-styled interior, with black and white photos on the walls, an old jukebox in the corner, and mismatched chairs, created a cozy atmosphere she had always missed at home. Emily, Nancy, the elderly waitress who'd been working there since the cafe first opened, greeted her warmly. "Long time no see. The usual tea with lemon and a croissant?" "Yes, thank you, Nancy." Emily tried to smile, but it came out weak. She walked to her favorite corner table, far from the windows and prying eyes. Nancy, who'd worked in service since the recession of the 80s, had that special intuition for reading customers' moods. Bringing the order, she didn't pester Emily with small talk, only gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder before leaving her alone with her thoughts. Emily placed the envelope on the table and stared at it for a long time, unable to bring herself to open it. What was inside? Another jab? An explanation? Or something that would turn her life upside down yet again? Finally, after a deep breath, she carefully tore it open. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and a key. A simple metal key with a plastic tag, on which an address downtown was written. Emily unfolded the letter. Margaret's handwriting was as clear and decisive as the woman herself. "Dear Emily, if you are reading this letter, it means my will has already been read, and you know about your share in the business. You are surely surprised and unsettled, perhaps even frightened. That's natural. I was never fair to you. For 15 years I saw you only as an unsuitable match for my son. A girl not from our circle, without money or connections. I was blind and foolish. Too late, I realized you were a kindred spirit. When I saw you working on that old jewelry box, it was like looking back in time, at myself as a young woman. You have the same movements, the same attention to detail, the same love for old things I once had, until I traded it all for status and money. The key you hold in your hand belongs to a property at 17 Main Street. I bought it years ago as an investment but never decided what to do with it. Now it's yours. A fully equipped workshop for restoring furniture and works of art. Everything is there. Tools, materials, special lighting. I consulted the best specialists to make sure it had everything a true restorer would need. Consider it my apology for all the years of neglect, and another gift, a chance to live out the dream I once betrayed. As for Victor the First, know my son. He's spoiled, selfish, and has never truly valued either you or even his own mother. Everything came to him far too easily. I blame myself for that. I let him grow up this way. But I also know that somewhere deep inside, he's capable of more. Maybe now, when he has to fight for what he thought was rightfully his, he'll finally grow up. As for you, Emily, I want to say this: don't be afraid of change. You're stronger than you think. You endured 15 years in our family. That alone speaks of incredible resilience. Now you have financial independence and the chance to start a new life. With Victor or without him, the choice is yours. P.S. Check the top drawer of the dresser in the workshop. There's something there that will help you understand why I did what I did. With respect and regret, Margaret Carter. Emily read the letter twice, unable to believe her eyes. It all seemed unreal. Financial independence, her own workshop, acknowledgement, and even a sort of apology from the woman who had looked down on her all her life. She sipped her now cold tea, trying to gather her thoughts. The key lay on the table, catching the light like a promise of a new life. Emily picked it up, turned it over in her hand, traced the ridges with her finger. Main Street, 17. She knew that address. An early 20th century building in the historic center of town, with ornate plasterwork on the facade and high ceilings inside. What could be in the top drawer? She wondered, and curiosity outweighed her confusion. After paying and thanking Nancy, Emily left the cafe and headed for the bus stop. Main Street was only a few stops away. The city bustled with its usual summer rhythm. Mothers with children hurried toward the park, elderly people sat on benches chatting about the latest news, groups of young people laughed loudly outside trendy cafes. An ordinary day, for everyone but Emily Carter, whose world had turned upside down. The bus was old, creaking on the turns, and nearly empty at this hour. Emily took a seat by the window, watching the familiar streets of her childhood roll by. She had grown up in this city, met Victor here, lived her entire life here. Yet now, it all seemed new, as if she were seeing it for the first time. Main Street, 17, was just as she remembered. A 5-story building from the early 1900s with an elegant, recently restored facade. The first floor housed shops, an antique store, a second-hand bookstore, a small cafe. Emily looked around, searching for a separate entrance, and noticed a plain door between the antique shop and the bookstore. The key fit perfectly. The door opened smoothly, as though its hinges had been oiled often. Behind it was a small hall and a staircase leading to the second floor. Emily climbed, noticing the steps didn't creak and the banister gleamed from polish. At the top was another door, a massive wooden one with a lion-shaped brass handle. The second key on the ring unlocked it. Emily stepped inside and froze in the doorway. She couldn't believe her eyes. The space was huge, with high ceilings and large windows flooding it with sunlight. But what stunned her wasn't the room itself, but what filled it. In the center stood a massive work table surrounded by shelves of tools. From simple screwdrivers and chisels to specialized restoration instruments she had only ever seen in professional journals. Against the wall stretched a long workbench with heavy vices and countless drawers. In the corner stood cabinets filled with jars and bottles, lacquers, paints, stains, and other restoration supplies neatly labeled. Everything was new, gleaming, arranged with meticulous care. Margaret hadn't lied. It truly was everything a restorer could dream of. At the far end of the room, Emily noticed something that made her heart ache. A mahogany secretary desk stood there, just like the one her grandfather had owned, only in far better condition. Next to it was an elegant dresser in classic style, with bronze fittings and a marble top. Emily walked slowly toward the dresser, remembering the postscript in the letter. The top drawer opened easily, almost inviting her in. Inside lay an old framed photograph and a small album. The photo showed a very young Margaret, someone Emily had never seen before. A girl of about 20 in a simple dress, smiling by a workbench, holding a tool in her hands. Her face glowed with pride and happiness. On the back was written, Margaret Thompson, Williams Workshop, 1974. Emily carefully opened the album. On the first page, in neat handwriting, were the words My Work. The pages held photographs of restored furniture, chairs, tables, jewelry boxes, each one dated and described. The last entry was from 1980, the year Margaret had married Andrew Carter. Beneath the album was another envelope, this one unmarked. Inside, Emily found an old clipping from Arts Culture with the headline Young Talents in Restoration. The black and white photo showed the same young Margaret receiving an award. The article praised a promising graduate of the restoration program, predicted a brilliant future for her. A future that never happened. A future Margaret traded for a prestigious marriage and social standing. Emily carefully put everything back and closed the drawer. Now she understood her mother-in-law so much better. Behind the coldness and arrogance had been a woman who once betrayed her own dream and regretted it for the rest of her life. A woman who had seen in her unwanted daughter-in-law a reflection of her younger self and decided to give her the chance she herself had forfeited. Emily slowly walked around the workshop, running her hands over the tools, opening cabinets, flipping through catalogs of materials. Every detail had been thought through: ventilation, lighting, even a small kitchenette with a kettle and microwave in the corner. She stepped to the window, looking out over the city below. From here she could see the old district, with its church domes and rooftops of historic buildings. The perfect view for a restorer's workshop. Her eyes fell on her phone. The screen showed 7 missed calls from Victor and 3 from Paul. She hesitated for a moment, then firmly switched the sound off. Today she needed to be alone, to process everything that had happened and decide what came next. Emily sat in the chair by the window, watching the sunlight play across the polished surface of the antique table. For the first time in years, she felt not fear of the future, but anticipation, as if a long winter had finally ended, and she stood at the threshold of spring. She pulled a small notebook from her purse, the one she always carried, and began jotting down ideas for the workshop. What services she could offer, what pieces of furniture she wanted to restore first, where to find clients. Her handwriting grew steadier, the list longer. An hour later, as the last rays of sunlight slid along the wall, Emily realized she was smiling. Smiling for real, like she hadn't in years. She stood, cast one last look around the workshop, her workshop now, and walked decisively toward the door. It was time to go home and face her new reality. But first, she dialed Paul's number. "Hi," she said when he answered. "Can you talk?" "Emily." Finally. I was starting to worry. "How are you?" "Hard to say," she admitted honestly. "Everything happened so fast. But I think I'm okay. Better than okay." "I'm glad." Paul's voice was warm with sincerity. "Victor's losing his mind. He called me, threatening lawsuits, lawyers. The usual." "I haven't answered his calls," Emily admitted. "I'm not ready to talk to him yet." "Good. Let him cool off," Paul advised. "Listen, how about we meet tomorrow? We can go over everything calmly. I could explain more about the company, how the board works. You'll need to get familiar with all of that." "Yes, that would be great," Emily agreed. "Thank you, Paul, for always being kind to me." "Hey, we're family," he replied simply. "Real family, not whatever Victor tried to build." After talking with Paul, Emily felt a little steadier. At least she wasn't alone in this new, unfamiliar life. Stepping outside, she breathed in the evening air. Twilight was falling over the city, the streetlights flickering on. Just another summer evening, but for Emily Carter nothing would ever be ordinary again. Her life had changed forever. She looked once more at the building that housed her workshop, memorizing every detail of the facade, and smiled. Then she walked purposefully toward the bus stop. Ahead lay a conversation with her husband that promised to be difficult, but Emily was no longer afraid. Whatever happened, she now had her own path. Home greeted Emily with unusual silence. Normally by this hour Victor would already be back from work, blasting the TV and demanding dinner. Tonight the apartment was dark and still, as if no one lived there. Emily flipped on the light in the entryway, slipped off her shoes, and went to the kitchen. She craved tea, hot and strong, to gather her thoughts before the inevitable confrontation with her husband. She set the kettle on and automatically opened the fridge, thinking about what to cook for dinner, but then stopped herself. Today had changed everything, including the old routines of their marriage. She would no longer be the obedient wife, always ready to please. The kettle had just begun to boil when the key turned in the lock. Heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway, and Emily straightened her back, bracing herself. Victor appeared in the kitchen doorway, and Emily couldn't help noticing how much he had changed in just one day. Usually impeccable, now he looked disheveled. His tie was crooked, his shirt untucked, his eyes bloodshot, whether from exhaustion or alcohol, she couldn't tell. "So you've shown up," he muttered instead of greeting her. "Where have you been all day?" "I was at the workshop," Emily replied evenly, pouring tea into cups. "Want some?" "What workshop?" Victor stepped into the kitchen and dropped heavily into a chair. "What are you even talking about?" "Your mother left me more than just shares." Emily sat down across from him, wrapping her hands around her hot cup. "She also left me a property downtown, fully equipped for restoration work." "What?" Victor stared at her in disbelief. "You're joking? The workshop on Main Street? The place she bought 3 years ago?" "Exactly," Emily nodded. "Main Street, 17. Second floor." Victor turned pale. "She told me it was an investment that she planned to open another store there." "Plans changed," Emily shrugged, forcing herself to speak calmly though her heart was pounding. "Victor, we need to have a serious talk." "What's there to talk about?" He shot to his feet, nearly toppling the chair. "My mother lost her mind before she died. You took advantage of that, and now you think you're in charge, right? That I'll dance to your tune for the sake of those 19%? "I didn't take advantage of anything," Emily answered firmly. "And I'm not asking you to dance to my tune. Victor, let's be honest, our marriage has been a formality for years. You live your own life, you have Alice. Leave her out of this." Victor cut her off. "Fine." Emily took a sip of tea, keeping her composure. "I'm just saying we're both miserable in this marriage. Maybe this is our chance to change things. You're free, I'm free. You can be with the person you really want, and you get 30% of my business." Victor shouted. "The business my mother built. The business that should have been mine." "Your mother decided otherwise," Emily said quietly. "And you know what? I'm starting to understand why." "Enlighten me," Victor hissed. "Because for you, it was always just about money and status." Emily met his gaze steadily. "For her, it was something more. Art, beauty, history. Things you never valued." Victor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What a touching speech. Did you rehearse it all day? Or did Mother dictate it to you in her letter?" Emily shook her head. The conversation was going nowhere. "Victor, I don't want to fight. I'm offering to settle this civilly. If you want a divorce, I'll agree. You'll lose your 19%, but you'll be free. Isn't that what you wanted?" Victor froze, looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Then suddenly he dropped back into the chair and covered his face with his hands. "You don't understand," he said hoarsely. "It's not just about the shares. Without the controlling stake, I can't run the company the way I want. And if you and Paul combine your shares, we can block any decision you make," Emily finished for him. "Yes, I understand. But is that really so terrible? Isn't it good, sometimes, to listen to others?" Victor lifted his red-rimmed eyes. "You don't know a damn thing about business. You're a teacher, Emily. You know how to tell kids about the War of Independence or the Great Depression, but in business you're nothing." "In business management, maybe," Emily admitted. "But when it comes to restoration, I know more than you think. And most importantly, I'm willing to learn." "Are you?" "What do you mean?" Victor frowned. "Your mother didn't draft that will by accident," Emily said gently. "She wanted us to work together. She wanted you to learn to value what you have. Not just money and power, but the people beside you. And she wanted me to find confidence, to believe in myself." Victor snorted, but without his earlier venom. "Sounds like some cheap romance novel." "Maybe," Emily smiled. "But sometimes those novels carry a grain of truth." They fell silent. The ticking of the old wall clock, an heirloom from Emily's grandmother that Victor had always wanted to throw out, filled the kitchen. Outside, darkness deepened, and the first stars appeared in the summer sky. "What are you suggesting?" Victor asked at last, and for the first time his voice carried no anger or sarcasm, only weariness. "Let's take a pause," Emily said. "No rush decisions. You think about what matters more to you, control of the company or freedom. I'll get used to my new role as co-owner. And in a month, we'll sit down and decide how to move forward." "And where will you live this month?" Victor asked. Emily hesitated. She hadn't thought about that yet. The apartment belonged to Victor, or rather, had been signed over to him by his parents before their marriage. She had no place of her own, no savings to rent somewhere else. "I could stay with Jennifer for a while," Emily said at last, thinking of her old friend and fellow teacher. "Or there's a small restroom in the workshop. Maybe temporarily." "Don't be ridiculous," Victor cut her off. "I'll move out. I'll stay in Mother's apartment for now. It's empty anyway." Emily stared at him in surprise. She hadn't expected such a generous gesture. "Are you sure?" "For God's sake, Emily, don't make me out to be a monster," Victor said wearily. "I can be an ass, but not to the point of throwing you out of your home." "Thank you," she said softly, unexpectedly moved. "Don't mention it," he muttered, getting to his feet. "I'll pack and leave tonight. I need some time alone to think." He started toward the door, then stopped in the doorway. "You know what's funny?" he said without turning around. "I really was going to file for divorce. Alice and I were planning to marry this fall. We even picked a date, September 21st. And now you have a choice," Emily said gently. "And that's a good thing, Victor. Choice is always a good thing." He gave a short nod and left. Emily heard him moving around the apartment, packing, doors banging, keys jingling. Then the front door shut, and the silence returned. Emily sat in the kitchen, finishing her cold tea, thinking how strange everything had turned out. That very morning she had been just Victor Carter's wife, the unnoticed shadow of a successful businessman. By evening she was a co-owner of a major company, the mistress of a workshop, and possibly only a step away from being a free woman. The life she had thought would be predictable until her last breath was suddenly filled with uncertainty. And strangely enough, that uncertainty didn't frighten her, it stirred her blood, like a glass of good wine. Emily got up, washed the cups, and went into the living room. She sat down on the couch and, for the first time in years, turned on the TV to a channel she wanted to watch, not the one Victor usually demanded. It's a Wonderful Life was playing, and Emily smiled, remembering how she had watched it as a child with her mother. A story about a man who finds a new perspective on life through hardships suddenly felt strikingly close to her own situation. Maybe at 45 life is only just beginning, she thought, and for the first time in a long while, she laughed out loud. The next weeks flew by for Emily. Her days were packed. Meetings with Paul, who was bringing her up to speed on the company, trips to the workshop, where she sorted tools and materials and familiarized herself with the equipment, talks with lawyers about her rights and responsibilities as a co-owner. Paul turned out to be an invaluable guide. He patiently explained the complex structure of the company, the specifics of the antiques market, pricing strategies, and much more. Emily absorbed it all like a sponge, amazed at herself. To her surprise, she enjoyed business, enjoyed working through numbers and strategies. "You pick things up fast," Paul told her after one meeting where they went over the quarterly report. Seriously, Emily, you're much smarter than you give yourself credit for. Thank you, she said with a shy smile. It's just all so interesting. I never thought the antique business was a whole world with its own laws and rules. That's exactly what it is, Paul nodded. And you know what matters most? It's a world where passion, knowledge, and respect for history count, not just money. That's what Victor always lacked. How is he, by the way? Emily asked. Have you seen him? Yes, he came by the office last week, Paul frowned. He doesn't look good. He's gaunt, twitchy. We didn't really talk, he just picked up some papers and left. Emily sighed. Victor hadn't called or come home since that night. His secretary had told her he was working from his mother's apartment, running meetings by phone, hardly seeing anyone. Is Alice with him? Emily asked, surprised at herself for not feeling pain when she said the mistress's name. I don't know, Paul shook his head. Word is she's not showing up at the office either. Took unpaid leave. They fell silent, each lost in thought. And how's your workshop? Paul asked at last, changing the subject. Coming along? Emily's face lit up. Wonderful. I've almost got everything organized. I even restored a couple of small items for practice. You know, I think in a week or two I'll be ready to open officially. Really? Paul said, genuinely excited. That's fantastic. Hey, want me to help with promotion? I know a couple of journalists who could write about your workshop, and we could feature it on the company's site. After all, you're a co-owner now. You don't think that would look inappropriate? Emily hesitated. The situation's unusual. Forget it, Paul waved her off. Business is business. Besides, Mother would have loved to see her antique stores working together with a restoration workshop. It's a natural fit. Emily smiled gratefully. With Paul, everything felt easy. He didn't see her as a threat or rival, just a kindred spirit, someone as passionate about art as he was. After meeting with Paul, Emily went to the workshop. The place had already become her second home. She could spend hours here restoring old pieces, poring over the professional books she'd found on the shelves, or simply thinking about the future. Today she had brought her grandmother's jewelry box from home, the very one she'd been working on when Margaret had found her. It was almost finished now, only the lock needed securing and the surface a final polish. Emily tied on her work apron, switched on the special lamp, and immersed herself in the task. Time disappeared. There were only her hands, her tools, and the old wood, which seemed to come alive under her fingers, finding a second life. She didn't hear the workshop door open. Only when footsteps sounded behind her did Emily start and turn around. Victor stood in the doorway. Hi, he said, shifting uneasily from foot to foot. I thought maybe we should talk. Emily slowly pulled off her work gloves and switched off the lamp. Hi, she replied, watching her husband carefully. Yes, I suppose it's time. Victor stepped inside, looking around with curiosity. For the first time, Emily saw him examining antique pieces not just for their price, but as if he were trying to understand their essence, their history. He stopped at the work table, where the unfinished jewelry box lay. This the one? He asked, running a finger gently across the inlay. The one Mother caught you working on? Yes, Emily nodded. My grandmother's. It's over 100 years old. Beautiful work, Victor said unexpectedly. I never noticed what interesting details it has. Emily looked at her husband in surprise. In 15 years of marriage, he had never once shown interest in her passions, let alone appreciated the beauty of an antique piece. You've changed, she remarked. 3 weeks alone will make a man think, Victor shrugged. Want some coffee? I saw you've got a coffee maker here. Sure, Emily agreed, still unsure where the conversation was headed. Only I think I'm out of milk. I brought some. Victor pulled from a bag. Emily only now noticed a carton of milk, a bottle of cognac, and a box of chocolates. Her favorite assortment, not the hated marshmallow candies. And good coffee. While he busied himself with the coffee maker, Emily watched, trying to understand what was happening. Victor didn't look as polished as usual. Jeans instead of slacks, a simple sweater instead of a shirt and tie. And his whole demeanor was different, like he had lost some of his arrogance. At last the coffee was ready. They sat by the window, and Victor poured the fragrant drink into cups, adding just a splash of milk, exactly how Emily liked it, strong but not bitter. You remember how I take my coffee? She asked in surprise. I remember a lot of things, Victor said quietly. I just didn't always pay attention. They sat in silence, gazing out at the evening city. The first stars were appearing above the rooftops, and somewhere far off, music floated through the air, probably the brass band that played in the park every Friday in summer. I won't beat around the bush, Victor finally said, setting his cup down. These 3 weeks, I've done a lot of thinking. About us, the company, about what Mom said in her video. And you know what I realized? Emily looked at him questioningly, not daring to guess. I realized she was right, Victor said, his voice trembling. I really never valued what I had. Not the business she built. Not you. A lump rose in Emily's throat. She had never expected to hear such words from her husband, who had always considered showing feelings a weakness. I'm not asking for forgiveness for all these years, Victor went on. I acted like a complete bastard, and there's no excuse for how I treated you. But I want, he faltered, searching for words. I want to try to make it right. If you'll let me. Make it right? Emily repeated. What do you mean? Victor pulled a small box from the pocket of his jeans and set it on the table between them. What's this? Emily asked, confused. Open it, he said. Emily carefully picked up the box and opened it. Inside lay a ring, a simple gold band with a small sapphire. The very same style he had given her when he proposed 20 years ago, the one she had stopped wearing after their son was born, when her fingers swelled and Victor had never bothered to buy a new one. I'm asking to start over, Victor said, meeting her eyes. Not for the shares, not for the money. For us. To try to rebuild what we destroyed over the years. Emily stared at the ring, at a loss for words. 3 weeks ago, she would have given anything to hear those words from him. But now. And what about Alice? She asked. Victor sighed. We broke up. Or rather, she dumped me as soon as she realized I might lose those 19%. Turns out, she was more interested in my wallet than my wonderful eyes. I'm sorry, Emily said sincerely. Don't be, Victor said with a bitter smile. I earned it. I spent my whole life measuring people by money, and got paid back in the same coin. He sipped his coffee and went on, you know, I actually talked with Paul the other day. Really talked, like we hadn't in years. And he told me about you, about how you're diving into the company, how quickly you're learning, how your eyes light up when you talk about restoration. Victor looked at the unfinished jewelry box. And then I remembered you 20 years ago, when we first met. That same spark, that passion. You told me about your dreams, about wanting to open a workshop, to work with antiques. And you said it wasn't serious, Emily finished quietly. That it was a housewife's hobby, not real work. Yes, Victor nodded. Just like my mother's father once told her. And she listened. Gave up her dream. Spent her whole life regretting it. He raised his eyes, and to Emily's surprise she saw real pain there. I don't want to repeat that mistake, Emily. I don't want to be like my father. I don't want you to give up what you love for what? For the status of being the wife of a successful businessman, he gave a wry laugh, who, as it turns out, isn't that successful without his mother and her connections. Emily said nothing, overwhelmed by the unexpected confession. I'm not asking you to answer now, Victor said, noticing her silence. Just think about it. Maybe Mom was right. Maybe we really should try again. For real this time. He stood, finishing his coffee. I'll go. You've got plenty of work. The ring, you can keep it, no matter what. It was always yours. Victor headed for the door, then stopped halfway. Oh, almost forgot. Did you get the invitation to the board meeting on Monday? Yes, Emily nodded. Paul said it's an important one. Presentation of the quarterly report and strategy for next year. Exactly, Victor said. I've prepared a proposal for expanding the chain. I'd like you to look at it beforehand. There are some interesting ideas, including integrating restoration workshops into the company structure. From the same bag he had pulled the milk and chocolates earlier, he now drew out a thick folder of documents. Everything's in here. Take a look when you have time. Call me if you want to discuss it. Victor set the folder on the table beside the ring box. Then, after a brief hesitation, he leaned down and kissed Emily lightly on the cheek, for the first time in many years. Goodbye, he said quietly, and thank you for listening. When the door closed behind him, Emily sat motionless for a long time, absently touching the spot on her cheek where his lips had brushed. Finally she shook herself, took a deep breath, and reached for the folder. On the first page was written, Carter Heritage Company Development Strategy, 2024-2025. Emily began to read, and with every page her eyebrows rose higher. Victor really had changed. His proposals weren't just a collection of numbers and charts, as she had expected. It was a full-fledged concept, blending the commercial side of the antique business with the cultural mission of preserving historical heritage. He suggested opening a small restoration workshop at every major store in the chain, where clients could not only buy antiques but also restore their own family heirlooms. Even more, he proposed creating an educational center where experienced restorers could share their knowledge with the younger generation. And to lead this center, he proposed her, Emily Carter. Given the teaching experience and restoration skills of E. Carter, Emily read in disbelief. She is the optimal candidate for the position of director of the Restoration Education Center within Carter Heritage. Her 15 years of teaching history, her deep understanding of antiques, and her rare talent for restoring historical artifacts make her a unique specialist, capable not only of running the center but also of shaping its strategic development. Emily set the documents aside, her head spinning. This wasn't just a business plan. It was recognition of her value as a professional, as a person. Something she had never received from Victor in all the years of their marriage. She picked up the ring box, opened it, and stared at the sapphire glinting in the lamplight. Should she give their marriage another chance? Or was this just another manipulation by Victor, who didn't want to lose control of the business? Emily didn't know the answer, but for the first time in many years, she felt she truly had a choice. And it was an extraordinary, intoxicating feeling. By Monday, Emily had made her decision. She had thought long and hard, weighing all the pros and cons, talking on the phone with Paul, even confiding in her longtime friend Jennifer. And now, as she stepped into the spacious conference hall of the Carter Heritage headquarters, she knew what she would say at the board meeting. Her arrival caused a stir. Before, she had only been here for the occasional corporate celebration, where Victor reluctantly introduced her with a curt, "My wife." Now she came as a co-owner, someone whose vote could shape the company's future. The board members, serious men and women in expensive suits, regarded her with barely disguised curiosity. Emily realized she wasn't nervous at all, contrary to what she had feared. On the contrary, she felt a calm, steady confidence. For this day, she had chosen a tailored navy blue suit, bought with the first payment she'd earned restoring an antique dresser for a neighbor. Simple but elegant pumps, minimal jewelry. Only pearl earrings, her mother's gift for her 30th birthday. Her hair was styled neatly, and her makeup was subtle, enhancing her natural beauty. Emily knew she looked impeccable, modest, yet refined. Victor was waiting for her at the entrance to the conference room. He wore his usual business suit, but his tie wasn't the commanding red he usually favored. It was a soft gray blue, the exact color of her eyes. Emily couldn't help but smile when she noticed. "You came," he said with clear relief. "I was afraid you'd change your mind." "I'm a co-owner of the company," Emily replied evenly. "Of course I came." "Of course," Victor nodded, and something like pride flickered in his eyes. "Did you read my proposals?" "Yes," she said. "A very interesting plan. Unexpected." "In a good way?" he asked quickly. "In a very good way," Emily confirmed. "But I have some questions and suggestions. We'll go over them after the meeting." "Of course," Victor nodded. "By the way, you look," he hesitated, searching for words. "Very beautiful." "Thank you," she said simply, and together they entered the room. The meeting followed its usual rhythm. Reports, figures, charts. Emily listened intently, taking notes, occasionally asking questions that surprised the board with their precision and insight. She noticed the expressions on their faces changing, from patronizing curiosity to genuine respect. Finally, it was time to discuss the development strategy. Victor stood and began his presentation. He spoke confidently and clearly, but without his usual arrogance. This was the voice of a man who truly believed in what he was proposing, not just trying to impress. When he finished, silence hung over the room. Then one of the directors, an older man with sharp, intelligent eyes, asked, "Victor, your proposal is interesting, but it requires significant investment. Are you sure the educational center will pay off?" "If I may, I'd like to answer that," Emily said, surprising even herself. All eyes turned to her, and she continued, "This isn't only about financial return. Such a center is an investment in the company's reputation and its future. We don't just sell antiques, we preserve cultural heritage. And for that, we need skilled specialists, who are unfortunately becoming more and more scarce." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Besides, the center will attract a new audience. Young people interested in history and craftsmanship. It will expand and rejuvenate our client base. And in the long run, that's exactly what the company needs to stay relevant in a changing world." The room fell silent again, but it was a different silence now. A silence of respect, of intrigue. "Emily's right," Paul finally said from the far end of the table. "I support this proposal. If it comes to a vote, I'm in favor." "I'm in favor too," said Sandra, surprising Emily most of all. Mom would have approved of this approach. "Then let's vote," said the board chair. All in favor of the proposed development strategy? Every hand went up. Unanimous. The motion passes, the chair confirmed. Victor, Emily, congratulations. Your proposal is approved. After the meeting, the board members gathered around Emily, introducing themselves, exchanging cards, suggesting one-on-one discussions to go over details. She answered calmly, confidently, feeling unexpectedly at ease in this new role. When everyone else had left, only she and Victor remained in the conference room. He was looking at her with a new expression, a mix of respect, surprise, and something more Emily couldn't quite place. You were incredible, he said. Seriously, Emily, I never realized you understood business so well. I didn't realize it either, she admitted honestly. But it turns out I actually enjoy it, and I'm not half bad at it. Not half bad. Victor shook his head. You were brilliant. They were all impressed with you. Even Morrison, and he's never impressed by anyone. Emily smiled, feeling her cheeks flush. Compliments like this from her husband were something she hadn't heard in years. Want to grab lunch? Victor asked. There's a decent restaurant. Let's go to the cafe instead, Emily suggested. The one with the hamburgers that taste like the ones from the school cafeteria. Remember? We went there when we first started dating. Victor looked at her in surprise. Nostalgia? That place is still open? Yes, Emily nodded. I stop by often. Everything's just like it used to be. The burgers, the milkshakes. Then let's go there, Victor agreed unexpectedly easily. I haven't had a proper burger in forever. They left the office together, and for the first time in a long while Emily didn't feel like an appendage to her husband. She walked beside him, as his equal, confident, certain of what she wanted from life. Thank you, Margaret, she thought, glancing up at the summer sky. You really did give me a chance at a new life. And maybe not just for me. Remember how we met? Victor asked, biting into his burger. They sat in nostalgia at the very same table by the window where Emily usually graded papers. Nancy, seeing them together, beamed and took extra care setting the table. She even brought out old porcelain cups with gold trim instead of the usual mugs. Of course I remember, Emily smiled. The treasures of American mansions exhibit at the History Museum. I was there with my students, and you. And I came with my mother, who was scouting pieces for her new store, Victor finished. And I immediately noticed a young teacher who was so passionate about antiques that even my mother stopped to listen. You came up to me after the tour and said you'd never heard anyone talk about furniture with such passion. Emily laughed at the memory. And then you asked me out right here. And you said yes, even though you usually didn't go on dates with strangers, Victor added. You told me you couldn't resist the hamburgers. They really were irresistible, Emily sighed playfully. And so were you. They exchanged smiles, and for a moment Emily felt like they had stepped 20 years back, young, in love, full of hope. What happened to us, Victor? She asked softly. When did we lose what we had? Victor stirred his coffee thoughtfully. Probably when I started taking you for granted. When I thought you'd never leave, that I could act however I wanted. When I stopped seeing you as a person and started treating you like part of the furniture. He raised his eyes, and Emily saw genuine regret in them. I was blinded by money, status, power. I thought the only things that mattered were outward success, recognition, things you could measure with numbers or buy with money. Everything else felt insignificant. And that's why Alice appeared. Emily asked directly. Victor sighed. Alice was a symptom, not the cause. I was already hollow inside when I met her. She just mirrored what I'd become. A pretty shell, perfectly matched for a man just as empty as she was. You're being too hard on yourself, Emily said gently. You're not empty. You just got lost. You've always been kinder than I deserved, Victor shook his head. Even now, after everything I've done, you still find kind words for me. They fell silent. Outside, an old bus rumbled past, reminding Emily of the day she rode to the workshop after first reading Margaret's letter. And you? Victor asked suddenly. Why did you put up with it all? Why didn't you leave? Emily thought for a moment. She had asked herself this question countless times over the years. At first, it was love, then habit, then fear of change, and also what? Hope, I guess, that someday you'd become the Victor the first fell in love with again. And now? He asked quietly. Is that hope still alive? Emily held his gaze for a long moment. I don't know, Victor. Honestly, I don't. Too much water under the bridge, too much pain. But, he leaned forward, hanging on her words. But I see you changing, and I am curious to see where that leads. Victor smiled faintly. You know, that's enough. For now, it's enough. They finished their burgers, drank their coffee, paid the bill, and stepped outside. The day was clear, warm, perfect for a walk. Without saying a word, they headed down the familiar streets toward the city park where they had once strolled as college kids. I saw the plans for your workshop, Victor said as they passed an old fountain. Very impressive, especially the idea of kids' workshops. Thanks, Emily smiled. I thought it could be part of our education program. Teaching kids history through objects, showing them the value of craftsmanship and the beauty of antiques. Brilliant idea, Victor nodded. By the way, I talked to Sarah in marketing. They're ready to design branding, a website, all the promo materials for your workshop. On the company's dime, of course. But why? Emily asked in surprise. I thought I'd open a small private workshop, my own project. And I think your workshop could be the flagship for our network, Victor said. The first model of what our restoration centers could look like. If you're willing, of course. Emily stopped, stunned. You're asking me to lead the entire chain of restoration workshops? Exactly, Victor nodded. Who else could do it better? You've got the knowledge, the talent, the teaching background, and most importantly, the genuine love for antiques, for the history they carry. Emily didn't know what to say. A month ago, she couldn't have dreamed of such a turn in her life. Think about it, Victor said, noticing her hesitation. You don't have to answer right away. They kept walking and soon reached a playground where children laughed and played under the watchful eyes of mothers and grandmothers. Remember when we used to bring little Alan here? Emily asked, watching the kids on the swings. He loved those swings so much. I remember, Victor nodded, his voice tinged with regret. I just wish I had made more time for it. It was always work, and he grew up so fast. Speaking of Alan, Emily recalled. Did you call him? Tell him about his grandmother's will? Yes, Victor sighed. He said it wasn't his concern, that all he cared about was his share of the inheritance. Like father, like son, huh? There was so much bitterness in his voice that Emily instinctively touched his hand gently. He's still young, Victor. Give him time. Maybe he'll grow and change too, just like you. I'd like to believe that, Victor said with a sad smile. I don't want him to repeat my mistakes. They reached a small ice cream shop, and Victor suddenly asked, Want a cone? Like we used to? I'd love to, Emily laughed, surprised he remembered such a little detail from their past. They bought ice cream and sat on a bench by the pond, watching ducks paddle back and forth, begging park visitors for crumbs of bread. You know, Victor said suddenly, for the first time in years, I feel calm. Like I've finally dropped a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for ages. I get it, Emily nodded. I feel the same. Like I can finally breathe freely. So what do you think? Do we have a chance? He asked carefully. Not to go back, that's impossible. But to build something new. Something real. Emily gazed at the water, at the sunlight dancing across its surface, at the ducks gliding by. Then she pulled the ring box Victor had left her a few days ago from her purse. I'm not ready to put this back on yet, she said quietly. Too much pain, too many wounds. But I am ready to try. Step by step. Victor covered her hand with his. That's all I could ask for. A chance to prove I can be better. That we can be better together. The next few months flew by for Emily like a single day. So much was happening all at once she barely had time to catch her breath. Her workshop on Main Street opened in mid-September and immediately drew attention. A feature in the city magazine, a segment on local TV, and a marketing campaign organized by the company's department, all of it worked. Clients came one after another, bringing antiques to be restored and seeking advice. The children's workshops Emily held on weekends quickly became the most popular. Kids eagerly learned the basics of restoration, listened to stories about antiques, and tried their hands at woodworking and varnishing. The workshop was turning into more than just a workplace, it was becoming a cultural hub. Historians, collectors, and restorers began gathering there. Emily glowed with happiness, watching her long-held dream come true. At the same time, work was underway to establish the company's Restoration Education Center. Emily took an active part in developing programs, hiring teachers, and equipping classrooms. It wasn't easy, especially since she still taught at school, though now part-time. Her relationship with Victor grew slowly but steadily. He didn't move back in, choosing instead to give her space and time. They met a few times a week, at cafes, in the park, at the workshop. They talked, got to know each other all over again, and learned how to listen. Sometimes they argued, the old hurts weren't so easy to forget, but now they could talk about their feelings, compromise, and respect each other's boundaries. At work, they became a true team. To many people's surprise, Victor turned out to be a strong executive director, but not a tyrant. He had learned to listen to others, including Emily, whose fresh perspective on the business often proved invaluable. One November evening, as the first snow covered the city in a thin white blanket, Victor invited Emily to dinner. Not at some elite spot for the business crowd, but at a cozy Italian restaurant that smelled of fresh bread and rang with live music. "I've got a surprise for you," he said after they finished their meal. "Actually, 2 surprises." "I'm not sure I'm ready for surprises," Emily joked. "The last surprise in our family turned my whole life upside down." "I think you'll like these." Victor smiled and pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Here, take a look." Emily opened it and found 2 plane tickets. "Paris?" she asked in astonishment. "At Christmas?" "Yes," Victor nodded. "I thought, we've never been there together. And you always dreamed of seeing the Louvre, the Orsay, Versailles. Plus, there are amazing antique shops and flea markets." But Emily was stunned. "We've never taken a trip alone. You always said vacations were a waste of time." "I said a lot of things," Victor cut in gently, "and I regret plenty of them. I want to make up for it, if you'll let me." Emily stared at the tickets, hardly believing her eyes. Paris at Christmas. It was like a forgotten dream come true. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's a beautiful gift." "And here's the second one," Victor said, handing her a small velvet box. Emily's heart raced. Could it be? She opened it. Inside wasn't the engagement ring she half expected, but an elegant brooch shaped like a tiny jewelry box, and laid with small sapphires. "It's an antique piece from the early 20th century, Victor said. "I found it in one of our shops and immediately thought of you. It symbolizes a new beginning, a fresh page in our lives. Will you accept it?" Emily lifted the brooch carefully. It was exquisite, fine workmanship, tasteful design, subtle yet elegant. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. "Of course I'll accept it." Victor helped pin the brooch to her lapel, his fingers lingering for a moment as they brushed her shoulder. "Are you happy, Emily?" he asked suddenly. "Now, in this new life?" Emily thought for a moment. Was she happy? After all the changes, the highs and lows of the past months? "Yes," she finally said. "Not the carefree happiness you have at 20, but the deep, conscious happiness of someone who knows the value of every day, every moment." She looked at Victor and added, "And you know what's most amazing? I'm grateful to your mother, for everything she did, for forcing us both to change. Without her, we would have gone on living in that gilded cage, never knowing what real freedom felt like." Victor covered her hand with his. "I'm grateful to her too, for saving us both from ourselves." They smiled at each other, and in that moment Emily understood, no matter what happened next, no matter how their lives unfolded, she would never regret having been given this unexpected chance at happiness. A chance to be herself, to find her voice, her strength. "To a new beginning," Victor proposed, raising his glass. "To a new beginning." Emily agreed, and their glasses met with a melodic chime, promising a new, brighter chapter in their story. "Good morning, Emily." A young woman walked into the workshop with a smile, carrying a tray with 2 cups of coffee. "I brought you cappuccino, just the way you like it." Emily looked up from the antique secretary desk she was restoring for the city museum. "You're a lifesaver," she laughed. "I got so caught up I forgot about the time." It had been exactly 2 years since those words in Gerald Peterson's office changed Emily Carter's life. 2 years filled with change, discovery, struggles, and joy. The Main Street Workshop was no longer just a workplace, it had become the hub of a whole network of restoration studios opened alongside the major Carter Heritage stores. And the Restoration Education Center Emily directed had already graduated its first group of young specialists, some of whom had become her assistants. Lisa, a recent history graduate, was one of her most gifted students. Emily saw herself in the girl, just as passionate, just as in love with antiques and their stories. "Paul called," Lisa said, setting the cups on the little table by the window. "He said he'll be half an hour late. Something about a shipment of antique clocks from Switzerland." "No problem," Emily nodded. "We've got plenty of time." Today marked the anniversary of Margaret's passing, and the whole family planned to gather at the cemetery, then have a small family lunch. In the last 2 years, much had changed not only in Emily's life but in the Carter family as a whole. Paul had grown closer to Emily and Victor, often coming over, helping with the business, and supporting them as family. Sandra, once wary, had warmed to her sister-in-law, especially after Emily helped her daughter get into art school, spotting the girl's talent for textile restoration. Even Alan, Emily, and Victor's son, who had first been skeptical of all the changes, was starting to come around. After finishing college in London, instead of staying abroad as he'd planned, he returned to the U.S. to join the family business. He was now interning in different departments, learning it from the inside out. Emily glanced at the clock. She still had time before meeting the family, enough to finish the trickiest part of the secretary desk. Putting on her magnifying glasses, she went back to the meticulous work of restoring the inlay. The past and present intertwined in her life like the patterns on the antique furniture she restored. Sometimes, in moments of full immersion, she almost felt Margaret watching over her, nodding in approval. The workshop door opened again, but this time it was Victor. He wore a suit, no tie, and carried a bouquet of white roses, his mother's favorite flowers. "Hey," he said, kissing Emily on the cheek. "Am I interrupting?" "I'm just wrapping up," she smiled, taking off her glasses. "You're early." "Moved a couple of meetings," Victor explained, perching on the edge of the table. "Wanted to pick you up so we could go to the cemetery together." Emily studied her husband. In 2 years, he had changed not just inside, but on the outside too. The arrogance in his posture was gone. New lines had formed at the corners of his eyes, from smiling, not stress. His early gray hair, far from making him look old, gave him a certain charm. Their relationship had weathered a lot. There had been moments when it seemed the past was too heavy to overcome, that the wounds ran too deep. But they hadn't given up. They worked on themselves and on each other. Victor even started seeing a therapist, something he once would have laughed at. "If I can hire a trainer for my body, why not a trainer for my soul?" he'd said. 6 months ago, he finally moved back home, and they began living together again, not as strangers under one roof, but as real partners, equals in everything. "What are you thinking about?" Victor asked, catching her gaze. "About us," Emily replied simply. "About how much has changed in these 2 years." "For the better?" His voice carried a hint of uncertainty, something once foreign to him. "For the better," she smiled, covering his hand with hers. On her finger, the sapphire engagement ring gleamed, the same one he had given her so many years ago, which she'd started wearing again last New Year's. They exchanged a knowing look, no words needed anymore. "How's the new project going?" Victor asked, nodding toward the drawing spread out on the other table. "It's moving along," Emily said with enthusiasm. "We've almost finished the layout. If everything stays on schedule, we'll open the workshop school for kids with special needs this fall." It was their joint project, a charitable initiative aimed at helping children with disabilities socialize and develop professional skills. Emily had the idea after meeting an autistic boy who showed remarkable talent working with wood. Victor supported her completely, providing space and funding from the company budget. "Excellent," Victor nodded. "I spoke with the Department of Culture. They're ready to include us in the traditional crafts support program. That means more funding and recognition." "Really?" Emily's face lit up. "That's wonderful. We'll be able to take in more kids." "That's exactly what I thought," Victor said with a smile. Emily looked at her husband with tenderness. How much he had changed. Once, all he cared about in any project was profit and prestige. Now he genuinely rejoiced at the chance to help those who needed it most. Of course, Victor was still a businessman through and through. He could still crunch numbers, negotiate hard, make tough calls. But now, beyond the numbers and contracts, he saw people, their stories, their struggles, their joys. "It's time to go," Victor said, checking his watch. "Paul's probably already waiting out front." Emily nodded, slipped off her apron, threw on a light coat. The June air was cool, and, after saying goodbye to Lisa, walked out with her husband. Paul really was waiting by his car, waving when he saw them. "I thought you'd be late," he said, hugging first his sister-in-law, then his brother. "Always buried in work." "As always," Emily agreed. "I'm restoring a museum piece. A gorgeous secretary desk, Paul. Walnut, mother-of-pearl inlay, bronze fittings." "She's hopeless," Victor joked, rolling his eyes. "Once she starts talking about work, there's no stopping her." "Look who's talking," Emily laughed. "Who was it last night going on for 2 hours about a new window display concept?" "Touché," Victor admitted, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Let's go, lovebirds," Paul cut in. "Or we'll be late, and Sandra will never forgive us. She's in a particularly ceremonial mood today." They got into the car and drove to the cemetery where Margaret was buried. On the way, Emily gazed out the window at the city passing by, so familiar and yet somehow new, as if she were seeing it through different eyes. So much had changed in these 2 years. She had left teaching, devoting herself fully to restoration and the education center. She and Victor had moved into a new apartment, spacious, but not gaudily luxurious like their old place. She'd made new friends, reconnected with old ones she had lost touch with when family life had consumed her. But most of all, she herself had changed. From a quiet, unsure woman who settled for less, she had become strong, independent, aware of her own worth. Yet she hadn't grown hard, cynical, or domineering. Quite the opposite, finding inner strength taught her to cherish even more the simple joys of life, friendship, love, the beauty of the world around her. At the cemetery, Sandra was already waiting with her husband and daughter. To Emily's surprise, Alan was there too, though he wasn't supposed to arrive until the evening. "Sweetheart," Emily hugged him, unable to hide her joy. "You said you'd be late." "Decided to surprise you," Alan smiled, hugging his mother back. Then he shook his father's hand and patted his uncle's shoulder. Emily looked at her son with tenderness. 23 now, tall, handsome, the spitting image of Victor in his youth, but thankfully, with a different character. These past 2 years had changed him too. He had grown more serious, more responsible, learned to value family and roots. Together they walked to Margaret's grave. The headstone was modest but tasteful, black granite, a simple inscription, and a small relief of an open book. Victor laid down the bouquet of white roses, and they all fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Emily's eyes rested on the portrait etched into the stone, Margaret's stern face, direct gaze, the faintest half-smile. That was how she remembered her, commanding, decisive, brooking no objections. Who would have thought that behind that icy, calculating exterior lived so much unspent love and so many unfulfilled dreams? "Thank you," Emily said inwardly, looking at the portrait. "For everything. For seeing in me what I couldn't see myself. For giving me a chance. For saving not only me but your son too. I hope you're proud of us now." She thought she felt a breeze ripple through the cemetery trees, whispering back, "Proud." After the cemetery, they went to the restaurant. The same one where they had once celebrated Margaret's 70th birthday, her last. Seated around a large round table, they remembered her, not just the last difficult months marked by illness, but her whole life, full of battles, triumphs, mistakes, and wisdom. "You know," Paul said suddenly, raising his glass, "Mom always used to say the most important thing in life is to leave a mark. Not just money or property, but something bigger. To change at least one life for the better." He glanced around the table. "I think she did far more than that. She changed all of ours. And not just changed, she gave us the chance to be better than we were. A chance to correct our mistakes, to find our calling, to discover real happiness. And for that, I'm grateful to her." "To Mom," Victor said, raising his glass. "To Grandma," Alan echoed. "To Margaret," Emily said softly. They drank, and the conversation moved on, to company matters, new projects, plans for the future. Sandra talked about her daughter's success in art school, Paul about his upcoming exhibition, Alan about his internship in London. Victor and Emily spoke of their charitable project for children with special needs. "And what about that museum idea?" Alan asked his father. "You said you wanted to open a restoration museum through the company?" "Yes, your mom and I are working on the concept," Victor nodded. "We want to create a space that showcases not just antique pieces, but the restoration process itself, so people can see how much effort, knowledge, and love goes into every single artifact." "And name it after Grandma?" Alan clarified. "Yes," Emily confirmed. "The Margaret Carter Restoration Museum. We think she would have liked that." "Absolutely," Paul smiled. "That's exactly the kind of legacy she'd want to leave." When lunch wound down and everyone began saying their goodbyes, Alan suddenly hugged Emily, tight, real, the way he hadn't in years. "You know, Mom," he whispered so only she could hear, "I'm proud of you. Proud of what you've done, of who you've become. And I'm glad you and Dad are back together. Really together." Emily's eyes stung with sudden tears at her son's words. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. "That means the world to me." She and Victor drove home in silence, each lost in thought. It had been an emotionally full day, and both felt a sweet kind of tiredness. "What are you thinking about?" Victor asked as they neared home. "Life," Emily said. "How strange its turns can be. Who would have thought 2 years ago everything would change like this?" "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Not for a second," Emily answered firmly. "And you?" "I only regret not realizing sooner what a treasure I had," Victor said earnestly. "So many years wasted." "They weren't wasted," Emily gently countered. "It was just another chapter of our lives. Not the happiest, sure. But without it, we wouldn't have this one, the new chapter. Victor parked the car in front of their building but didn't get out right away. You know what I've been thinking, he said, turning to her. Maybe we should renew our vows. Celebrate 20 years of marriage not just with a dinner or a trip, but properly, as if we were entering a brand new union, built on who we are now. Emily looked at him in surprise. That was the last thing she expected him to suggest. Are you serious? Completely, Victor nodded. We could keep it small, just close family. Or go big. A masquerade ball in historical style, considering your love for the old days. Emily laughed. A masquerade ball? You? The man who always hated costume parties? For you, anything, Victor said seriously. I want you to be happy. Truly happy. Emily studied him, his graying temples, the lines by his eyes, the sharper features that came with age. He was the same Victor she had once fallen in love with, and at the same time a completely different man. Wiser, softer, more human. I'm already happy, she said softly, but I like the idea. Just no masquerades, please. Just us, our family, our friends. And vows, real ones, from the heart. Deal, Victor smiled. He leaned in and kissed her gently, just like he used to, long ago, at the very beginning of their story, when the whole world seemed full of possibilities and hope. Emily returned the kiss, her heart filling with warmth. Life had taken an unexpected turn, but it had led her exactly where she was meant to be, to her true self, her calling, her happiness. Stepping out of the car, they took each other's hands and walked toward their home. The evening sun gilded the treetops, music drifted faintly from somewhere in the distance, and a soft breeze carried the scent of blooming linden. Just an ordinary summer evening in the lives of two people who had finally found their way, back to each other, and back to themselves. Thank you, Margaret, Emily whispered again, looking at the sunset sky. For an inheritance that turned out to be so much more than money or shares. For a chance at a real life. And she thought she heard the gentle breeze murmur in reply, live happily, Emily. Live fully. That's the greatest legacy one person can leave another. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to our channel. Your support inspires us every day to bring you new, captivating stories. And right now on the main screen, you can already find our next story. We wish you all the very best and true happiness in life.